The Forum at 8 with Xolani Gwala.
8 minutes after 8. Once again, we say good morning to you. Welcome to the Forum at 8 here on SFM, South Africa's news and information leader. Well, this morning we're looking at the ability, if you will, whether or not the SAPS is well equipped to deal with the protests. You may have heard this a couple of days ago, Police Minister Nathi Mthethwa saying that police in this country should not use maximum force unnecessarily. And he went on to acknowledge that their heavy-handedness in dealing with civil protests affects their relationships with people that they are meant to protect. He was speaking there at that Pop Crew Crime Summit in Boksburg a couple of days ago. Now, we want to look at that. We want to find out exactly whether or not is there a problem around training, or is it, as he also alluded to, a failure to account on the part of the SAPS? Because he also went on to suggest that perhaps the issues of lack of accountability have some historical background in as far as the SAPS is concerned. What are your thoughts then? Send me an email this morning, gwalax@sabc.co.za, gwalax@sabc.co.za. But also I'll be taking SMSs as well at 34701, 34701. I've already got one or two emails, I beg your pardon, that I'm going to read for you in a few. But let me just quickly first introduce my guests on the program this morning, starting with Captain Dennis Adriao. He is the SAPS national spokesperson. Captain Adriao, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Good morning.
Thanks indeed. Also on the line for us this morning is Barbara Holtman, independent facilitator, community safety processes. A very good morning to you, Ms. Holtman. Thank you for your time.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks indeed. Also joining us on the line, Hassan Logat. He's a social commentator. Hassan Logat, good morning to you.
Good morning, Xolani.
Thanks indeed. Let me read these emails, then perhaps I'm going to get your views on what we're talking about this morning. There's somebody who wants to remain anonymous, who says, in Grahamstown at Joza location, this email came through just a couple of minutes ago. In Grahamstown at Joza location in particular, a satellite police station is closed and we can't get basic services such as certifying documents, and we are then forced to travel kilometers to the nearest town for such services. Secondly, police in general, he says, hate black people with passion and are unwilling to serve them. Hence, when dealing with us, they use brutality, intimidation for their own gain. The officers manning help desks are very rude and display explicit contempt when dealing with the public. They pass rude and unbecoming remarks about your presence as if you are a burden to them. In my observations, they are doing us a favor by giving you attention. They hate sitting behind the desk so much because there is less opportunity of shooting or beating up civilians. Why can't civilians be on the help desk then and police deal with matters related to them? That email came through from Anonymous a short while ago, but also another one from Archbishop Boisile Western Kwenene. The police are incompetent. They failed dismally to arrest the criminals. They were undemocratic thugs that stripped naked married people in the Union Strike of Platinum Mines. These hooligans were not arrested and shamed. In South Africa, foreigners are selling pirated music in broad daylight and are not arrested. Some police know the drug lords that are killing our nation, but they are not arrested. But then again, of course, this is not necessarily what we are dealing with. We are dealing with whether or not then police are able to deal with demonstrations. There are reports even this morning of running battles between police and demonstrators. And in the past, you probably would have seen this on TV as well. Police in South Africa just easily using their weapons, whereas if you're watching demonstrations in other parts of the world, police, in a sense, have a particular way in which they deal with demonstrators. Let me start with Hassan Logat. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, thanks a lot. I think the minister's comments are welcome because I think what the initial change we had in this country, we had a very brief honeymoon period in terms of the police, a name change basically from force to service, and then of course with Bheki Cele militarizing it again, and now the minister's talking a good talk. Quite clearly, I think for protesters, their view has been that depending on their political persuasion, more pressure has been meted out to people who are not supportive of the ruling party. Andre Satani and those kind of groupings are clearly an example of what is being said. But I think we're also talking about policing in a democratic society, and you can see what's happening in Greece worldwide. When there's an economic crisis, police, by and large, go back, they read the signals from the ruling people, the ruling classes, the ruling political groups, and then their mandate really is to hit the poor. keep them in line. So I really think that in our country, what we've had an equivalent one is that the social movements, the independent social movements, anti-privatization and others, have for a long time alleged that their supporters have been getting extra treatment, not favorable, more harsher treatment than those of us who worked in the unions and elsewhere, because we tended to work in an alliance. Now, whether that's true or not, it seems that crisis of confidence runs very, very deep. People do not trust the police that are supposed to protect them, and not just protect private property.
I know SAMU in particular has complained quite bitterly in the past about how they've been treated
amongst
by police.
others.
Yeah, among others. But let me ask you this. Are you implying that there is some implicit political backing for these kinds of actions by the police?
Well, anyone else reads the signals. I mean, when you look at whether the editors of a newspaper in Britain and elsewhere follows the master's voice, they don't have to get a mandate. They know what the boss likes through suggestions. Quite clearly, our economic crisis is far worse than what's happening in Spain. We've managed to live with it because we don't know better, but you can see what repression is there when poor people try to protest. I mean, I believe from the studies done by various people that there are many social service delivery protests per week, at least two or so. And these communities know if they have to be heard, they have to put some tire out in the street, and the police come and they shoot, and then voila, the news come, and then there are promises from politicians. So there's a far deeper crisis. The role of the police talks about also the crisis on us meeting the needs of poor people, not just social service delivery needs, but also them to feel a part of the democracy very genuinely.
Ms. Barbara Holtman, let me get your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with a lot of what's been said. For me, the issue is not whether or not the police are properly capacitated to deal with these kinds of crises, but why we aren't shifting the conversation in our society to understand better why it is that when people protest, there is such an obvious sense that they don't feel that there is any need to protect either their environment or to find alternative mechanisms for conflict. So things do become very angry. And places are trashed, and then it does become a policing issue. I think one of the problems is that we tend to see things in South Africa as being about providing security, which is responding to a known risk, a threat in a particular situation, instead of thinking more broadly about what it would look like if it was safe. And one of the big issues about that is that I think there are huge numbers of people, of disaffected people in our country who have no sense of themselves in the bigger picture of what it looks like when it's fixed. They don't have a sense of themselves moving towards a place in which things are better, and that's the conversation we really need to be having with people. I also think that the police have suffered over many, many years, as has the citizenry of South Africa, suffered very deep and broad victimization. So the police are exposed to enormous amounts of trauma, violence directed either at them or as bystanders, to appalling violence on an ongoing basis. And we don't provide them with much support for that.
All right, let me go back to your first point and see if I understand you properly. Are you suggesting that perhaps we need to also shift the debate and look at the protesters themselves and the fact that perhaps their first option is always violent protest as opposed to normal civil protest, if you will?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we need to unpack that. We need to understand why that's the case. And it's not rocket science to work it out. I mean, I think it is because people don't feel that they're a part of a collective future that's getting better.
All right. Sorry to interrupt you, because I think there will certainly be a discussion about that, and I asked the minister a couple of days about exactly the same thing, Minister Richard Baloyi. But the other issue, though, related to that is that there are protests elsewhere in the world. You would have seen the riots in London recently. But police are equipped to deal with these protests regardless of whether or not they are violent. Because you would never have seen a Dadane-type situation in London simply because there is a certain level of training given to the police ahead of those kind of situations.
Well, I think the police did a terrible job in London. I mean, I don't think they did a fabulous job at all. But I don't think that they have the history that we have. I mean, I think the point about the transformation, and we can argue about whether it was a name change, I saw some very real efforts towards transformation of the police over the last 15 years. But I think one of the big issues there is that we are using the police again in exactly the same way as we did before 94 to suppress public dissatisfaction, and that makes it very hard. It confuses the relationship between the police and the communities they serve. Having been told for many years that they need to be representative of those communities and they need to see themselves as being part of those communities, how do they in fact address this themselves with integrity when they are now put again into that position where somehow they are separated from the communities from which they come? I
think that's a very important point, and let's test it then with Captain Adriao. How do you respond to those points then, Captain?
Thank you, Tulani. And thanks to Barbara. I think Barbara brought up some very valid points that I would have brought up as well. I agree with Barbara. There has been major transformation within the South African Police Service, and specifically with our public order police. And, we have sent our officers worldwide to research the best practices and try and benchmark the best possible training. And that we've given our police officers even prior to the 2010 World Cup. If you remember, we had members of the French in South Africa giving our public order police members training specifically to bring our standards and training methods to international standards. And it's worked very, very well. And I think we need to also bear in mind that it has been protest marches that have been peaceful. There's been no heavy-handed action at all from the police. We've policed it as would be required to. Unfortunately, we sit with virtually every single day a number of very violent protests where people not only throw stones at our police officers, fire rounds at our police officers, burn down municipal buildings and vehicles, put other lives in danger, and that necessitates our members to act. And, I know that the Minister has made a number of comments, and I know that we're busy with internally, relooking and seeing what we can do in terms of public order policing module, looking in terms of capacity and equipment. We've bought water cannons, we use tear gas, rubber bullets when necessary, but the level of force that we use is obviously dependent on the violence that is exerted by the protesters.
All right. You know what?
Our intention, obviously, is to disperse the protesters. And what we always try and do is initiate some talking. We try and identify the leaders and talk to the leaders and find out what is it, that we can say or do to calm the situation before we even resort to any sort of dispersing methods. And what we find is frustrating is that these protesters are angry because of promises that were given either through authorities or whatever the case might be. And then we, from the police, obviously, we have an obligation in terms of the law to act when property and violence is taking place on our streets.
Well, I don't agree.
And if you mentioned London, London riots went on for a few days. And in France as well, in Paris, in the city center, went on for a few days. And a lot of people questioned their and their capacity and capability of dealing with riots. We've been fortunate that, when we act, we also try and institute a communication channel between the leaders of those protesters and our police members, because community policing is the essence of in South Africa.
Yeah.
We can't be greeting the community the one day and then the next day firing tear gas to disperse them because they're building municipal buildings down. So we try and initiate meetings to address the problem that's being created that's actually resulted in this violent protest marches.
Okay. All right. You know what? I'll open the lines, by the way, on 0891 104 208. I've got a lot of SMSs that are coming through at 34701 and emails at gwalax@sabc.co.za. Let's find out what people think about this. It's an important issue, clearly, because there are these protests. And if you look at the numbers, the protests, I think since 2009 in particular, somebody made, or somebody gave us these stats that they probably would have doubled the number of protests that took place since 2004. So it is going to happen. It happens on a daily basis. How then should these issues be dealt with? 0891 104 208. I know that Hassan wanted to come in and you were saying you would disagree with some of what the captain was saying.
Well, only as far as I think that the mandate of the police as to they have to, in fact, my experience working with public services internationally in the early 90s was that Swedish unions, for example, had to protect progressive people to march because neo-Nazis were also marching at the same time. So I think what must happen here, the police must not only look at the one right in the Constitution, property, they should look at people also fulfilling the other rights, the right to food, etc., and people need to do that. And if someone throws a stone from there, clearly this is what progressive policing is about, is to make sure that it doesn't result in deaths of people. I mean, the ICD reports are filled of how many people have died in police custody, under the hands of the police. So quite clearly, these figures will embarrass figures under apartheid, and that's sad.
But again, having said that, Hassan, the issue that my two other guests are raising is the violent nature of the protests in this country. That it's not about.
You see, this is the point I'm saying to you. I admit some of them are. They want to attract attention, so we've got to deal with the causes of it. But the violence of hunger, desperation, being marginalized, all that is also a form of violence. Don't only look at the stone throw. That's the end product. So to be proactive means that the police must talk to communities, but also to the power holders.
But it is possible that police are caught between a rock and a hard place, so to speak, because you then have these people who, without talking, are violent, and you've got to make sure that you maintain order. And how else do you respond to violence other than perhaps being strong-handed or heavy-handed?
I don't agree. I mean, the police have a mandate to respond, to be of service to the communities and to respond to those people that we have elected. So they've got a delicate balance to point out. But oftentimes, when people just say, you heard the email about mining villages and that, some of them tend to think that their job is to protect the rich or those who have against those who do not have. The police cannot resolve this on their own. It's a political problem.
Barbara?
Yeah, I mean, I totally get that. I'm not suggesting that it is the protesters who initiate violence from nowhere. I think that the whole system is extremely violent, and I agree that marginalization is as violent as it gets. What I'm saying, though, is that what we seem to be doing is coming back full circle, where instead of addressing those issues, and I really do believe that it's about whether or not those who are marginalized have any sense that where we're moving towards is a place that's better for them. And that conversation isn't happening. And because it isn't happening, the journey towards it being better for them is probably not happening. And I think there needs to be a relationship of trust established, not just between the police and communities, but where the communities see themselves as a part of what is happening in South Africa and of a future that brings some hope. We know that people who have no hope are much more likely to vandalize, to be violent, to express that hope through actions that reflect deep depression and anxiety and sadness and grief. And that's not a good place for us to be in our society. I think that what's very sad from a policing perspective is that because they then hit the front line of all of that emotion, we judge their performance by it, whereas I think that we should be judging our police performance against a degree of difficulty that is really outrageous. If we look at the international models, I always say of people like the Norwegian police, if our police went to Norway, they would do an absolutely fabulous job. If the Norwegian police, who are highly regarded as absolutely, as they say, best practice, came to Johannesburg, they'd run away screaming. What we're asking our police to do is extraordinarily far beyond the limits of what they can possibly deliver.
Because probably some of it is not policing, it's about, and this is the SMS that's coming through here. I'm going to get responses from you in a second. There's an SMS from Julius Kwamhlanga, for instance, who says, politicians mess up and leave police to clean up. If there was service delivery, police would be left to catch criminals. Is that the core of what is happening, would you say? Perhaps, Captain, I'm not sure, this is a political question, I'm not sure if the Captain would want to respond there.
Well, yeah, you're putting me in a tight spot there. But what I would say is that, the people are protesting for specific issues and specific reasons. And probably because authorities, or whoever the case might be, that have been promising or that have been talking to them haven't fulfilled what they, required them to do. So protesters obviously become more and more violent and angry and dissatisfied about what's taking place and take to the streets. But I also just wanted to add that, police officers come from those communities. And I think that we mustn't forget that our members stay in those communities. So when a police officer has to act you must remember that when we talk about community, it's not the whole community that's protesting and being violent. It's usually a small core of members that are the violent groupings that go and burn down the council buildings or vehicles in the street. And our members have to act, in terms of, you're right, our mandate, but we also, as much as we want to comply with constitutional rights of somebody to march and voice their dissatisfaction about whatever the case might be, we also need to bear in mind that the destruction of property and putting people's lives in danger will not be tolerated. So that has to be, respected, the right to march, but then again, the rights of the police to act once criminal acts start coming into play.
Sure. Just a very quick one for you, Hassan, here, because it relates to exactly what we're talking about. Sam, for instance, has sent an SMS saying Hassan confuses the police with politicians, and that's exactly the point, that perhaps the police are sometimes asked to deal with political matters, which should not fall within their mandate.
No, I agree with him. I'm not confusing it. I think the police are asked to be the enforcers of a system that's unjust.
All right, okay. What I will do is, because I'm coming up to 8:30, he's got in the newsroom. I know there's a couple of people already on the line, and also a lot of emails at gwalax@sabc.co.za.
The Forum at 8 with Xolani Gwala.
Well, we're talking about claims, allegations, if you will, that police are using maximum force, that they are being heavy-handed in dealing with civil protests, and we're taking your thoughts. Remember my guests this morning, Captain Dennis Adriao. He speaks on behalf of the national, he's the national spokesperson of the SAPS, also Barbara Holtman, independent facilitator, community safety processes, as well as Hassan Logat, social commentator. Your thoughts then, 34701. Let me read you SMSs, emails, and take a call here. There's Mel in Cape Town who says, Andrew Brown's book Solace shows exactly great insight into this particular subject. Thank you. We'll certainly try and look at that book there, Mel. Another one says, the way developed nations all beefed up their riot equipment and training suggests to me that they knew the people would be rising up against greed and corrupt globally. That's ish. Charles in Cape Town says, the aggressive approach of Metro Police around the country as an entity served to aggravate this particular issue. Dorong Ramela says police from Pop Crew, who happen to be part of the Tripartite Alliance, are likely to be biased towards those who are opposed by marchers or protesters. Chat in Cape Town says police are using disproportionate violence against poor people. Riot police must use shields and helmets instead of bullets. Pat in PE says the Tsotsis also join the protest marches just because they want to cause mayhem and maximum destruction. Another one says, for as long as I receive my salary, it's fine. We are less motivated. We are highly criticized by everyone, and that results to the policing spirit and culture being down. I think that will cause concern all around. A couple of other SMSs. Joel in Port Elizabeth, please, not all police are violent. Also, some of our people are destructive and violent, especially when they see TV cameras. Sam says, your analysts are armchair critics. Thugs loot shops, they assault people, etc. The police should be supported and not lambasted on this issue. Let's quickly go then to Pat in Vryburg. Hello, Pat.
Hello, Xolani.
Hi, welcome.
My take is that the police are a service, that they do provide a civil service, just like the health service and so on. So most of the time, the police are in contact with the community, engaging with them and knowing what is happening. But by the time the protest happens, the police provides a different service of providing, and now the person talking is a politician. So I just want to mention that in every day, on an everyday basis, the police are engaging with the community.
Okay, that's Pat in Vryburg. Let's go to Jonathan in Port Elizabeth. Hello, Jonathan.
Hello, Jonathan. Good morning, Colin, and good morning to your listeners.
Yeah, hi, go ahead.
Listen, I don't think we should be lambasting the police for everything, because if you look at the police, they are continually under threat. And what they should be, maybe doing more is arresting those people who are perpetrating crime on these union marches. Because these unions are always saying, yes, no, it's a different element in our midst and blah, blah, blah. But we know that the unions are the ones who are causing all this mayhem, this destruction, and even in cases, murder of people to get their point across and to force the population to do what they want them to do. So maybe they should be actually watching this crowd control, like we saw with the DA and the COSATU. Those particular people throwing stones and arresting those guys and getting the truth out of that, and then fine the unions for destruction of property, etc., etc.
All right, Jonathan, thank you. Let me read some emails, then come back and get responses from my guests. There's Siyabonga Ncube who says, I myself have led a number of protests and marches, and I have seen police attacking unprovoked, and thereafter one is not even allowed to open a case for the people who are injured. I believe that police should bear some consequences for forgetting their mandate, which is to protect. That is an email from Siyabonga Ncube. Another one came through. It says, what was this? Feds, I think it is. It says, this is now becoming a political field where every appointed politician will chop and change without regard to the sensitivity of policing. The training given to the police is not sufficient, as they always seem not to be sure when to be militant and when not. The minister should start from training programs of these police before looking at any way to ease out as they usually do. Let me bring in the captain then. Perhaps your responses to what you've heard so far, Captain Adriao.
Thank you, Talani. Well, thank you for some of the messages of support there. The one caller brought up a very valid point about, the people that we arrest that are involved in these violent protests, burning vehicles and buildings and so forth, that are charged for public violence. That is a concern from our side, and I know that we're busy with the negotiations with NPA for a stronger sort of sentencing and convictions, because at the moment some of the people are just getting fines and being released the next day, and what sort of message does that give out if people are involved in these violent protests and violent actions and criminal acts? So that's definitely a good point that was brought up, that we are busy with discussions with the NPA. In terms of training, we're constantly looking at bettering our training, and as I said, we look at international best practices as well. And on the other caller that spoke about having led some of the protest marches and some policemen having been heavy-handed, police officers, there has been cases where police officers have been heavy-handed, and we've taken immediate action once that's come to our attention. So we obviously also encourage the public out there that feel that a policeman acted completely out of his mandate and heavy-handed and to come forward and open up the case. And they can do it either with the police or they can go to the Independent Complaints Directorate, which is independent of the South African Police Service. So there are channels, for people to voice their concerns and to take their complaints further.
One SMS, I think it came from Cape Town, was Chet, who was suggesting that police should not be using bullets anyway. They should be using shields and helmets. Is that a fair suggestion?
We do equip our police officers with helmets and shields, but it depends on the level of the violence. And it's not bullets as we know it. It's what we call rubber bullets at times. And that we only use depending on the escalation of the violence. And that's at the worst possible level of violence that we use the rubber bullets to then try and disperse the crowd. But there's various mechanisms that we use and equipment, from water cannons, the tear gas, our approach, how we try and deal with the community. We talk to the community leaders in terms of dispersing the crowd. So there's various approaches that we do take, and there's various types of equipment that we use first and foremost before we go over to rubber bullets.
All right. Let me get a comment again from Barbara, given some of the comments already made.
I think we're probably all saying more or less the same thing. My sense is that the police are overburdened, not just in this regard, but in all regards. The demands we make on our police are absolutely extraordinary, and I think that the levels, there can be no doubt that their repeated exposure to violence, to the anger, and also I think in an environment where, in the rest of the world, when a policeman is injured or dies, the country stops and is horrified and expresses its deep horror. In South Africa, when an officer falls, it's barely a blip on the radar. We need to change the way that we relate to the police if we want to change the way the police relate to us. And I think that is something that we really need to put a lot of effort into. The police need an enormous amount of support. And I think that I'm not saying that because I just think the police need a lot of support. I think if we want the police to deliver democratic policing, if we want a healthy police service that can make good choices in the spur of the moment, under pressure, then we need to shift our entire relationship with them. And we need to ensure that it's not just training that they have, but that they understand that they are in a widely supported environment in which people respect the tasks that we ask them to undertake for us and the risks that they face when they do so.
Hassan, I'm going to come to you in a minute. Let me read emails again. Jablani in Durban says, it's all well to accuse SAPS of heavy-handedness, but if you look at how violent and destructive protesters and criminals are, the poor salaries they get and the ease with which criminals are let off by courts, police really cannot shoulder all the blame by themselves. That's Jablani in Durban. Another email came through from Kinosi, who says, the SAPS problems are due to a number of things, but the main problem comes with the poor leadership as seen by the South Africans. 2 successive national commissioners have been suspended and the other sent to prison. The head of intelligence is now suspended. Attitude is the reflection of leadership. If the leadership was tuned to serve the nation as they promised, this would cascade to the junior officers. If senior officers don't want to obey laws, why should junior leaders follow the law? That is an email from Kinosi. Another email came through from Chad Mercer, who says, somebody made a joke the other day that the SAPS is the only apartheid institution that has resisted all the changes that have taken place in South Africa. Now that you raise this issue, could this be a matter of tradition in a manner in which the police have always dealt with the people? That's a question from Chad Mercer. Stelo Mtetwa also wrote to us this morning. Cisco, I beg your pardon, Mtetwa, says the topic at hand is very crucial, and I think it may not just end at the studio. Mr. Mtetwa must take a drastic step with the negative attitude our police officers have in general towards ordinary people, especially police officers in Tembisa Station. Please, we need a serious intervention on this matter. Warm regards. That's Cisco Mtetwa on email. Let's go to Lebogang in Johannesburg. He's the Deputy General Secretary of POPCRU. Good morning to you, sir. Thank you for your time.
We just want to make input with regard to the topic.
Yes, go ahead.
The dissolution of area units in 2006, the research made by the Institute of Security Studies did indicate that there's an increasing number of public violence incidents, and therefore what we would recommend is that lessons that we've drawn from that incident is that skilled members who've been there for years and well-trained were sent to stations, and then not equating that to increasing number of incidents for the police, the service to bring them back so that they can impart the skills on the young members. I've attended several public gatherings where some turned violent, and you find out that reservists and students are posted there. I'm not making a reckless statement. I'm a police member myself for 25 years, where reservists and students are sent to these incidents. They are untrained, unskilled, and panic. And in a mode of panicking, lots of things go out of hand. And therefore, our view is, like Barbara said, there is an increase of this incident still. Then we have 4,000 members in national components of the police, 4,000 members. Why then are we employing paper pushers at head office? And the role of the police is to combat crime and not to push papers at head office, rather decrease the number of members, including in managerial level, to fight crime on the ground. And then the other issue is that around the public order policing, we think that what needs to be done is to review the size of the public order units informed by the population size and other issues, factors that may lead to within the station areas. Then the frequency of the incidents must also be looked at into the mobilization of the crime intelligence components or the units, so that the crime intelligence unit can also inform the police about possible public violent incidents.
Sure.
For the police to be proactive. I agree with Barbara when she says that the police are overburdened and are getting attacks from all sides instead of them being supported from all sides.
All right. Lebogang, I really thank you very much for calling this morning. He's the Deputy General Secretary of Pop Crew. There you have it then, Captain. How do you respond?
Well, Lebogang is quite correct in saying that when the first incidences of public violence start, it's the local police officers that usually get called out to respond. They usually get to that scene and assess the situation, and then obviously call in the public order police. The public order police are the ones that are specifically trained and specialize in dealing with these sort of incidences. But I need to say as well that all our police members, once they enter into the police, go through crowd control training. It's basic crowd control, and we don't expect the police officers at the police station level to deal with protesters on that level at all. But they're just given training so that until the public order police arrive there, they can just monitor the situation and obviously monitor the crowd and keep the public order police informed of what's taking place until their arrival.
Hassan?
Yeah. I think, Lebogang, I have some hope for police unions because I think in some way they can go towards fully realizing the principles enshrined in the Constitution, not only property rights, the other rights as well. And since you're talking about resources, I think Vauda and McKinley wrote a study in 2005-06, Arresting Dissent, where they made very practical suggestions what social movements should be doing, what the state should be doing to make sure this marginalization is overcome. In fact, one of the suggestions they made then was some conference with these communities to talk about their role in the economy and, what's the future for them. So I think where we're all failing, and this is communities as well that I'm supporting, is that police and communities sometimes are complicit in attacking refugees, or police stand by when refugees are being attacked. When they are seen as the byproduct of a demonstration. So I really think that's a scourge that we need to try and tackle collectively.
All right. Barbara, your thoughts on the dissolution of area units, reservists and students being afraid and panicking, and the review of the size of the public order policing units?
Yeah, I think I think that all of those things have relevance. I think that it is very important for all of us to constantly stop and think about what we're trying to achieve, and not just short-term goals, but really what does it look like in the big picture? What are we aiming for? What kind of South Africa do we live in? And how do we each play our part to ensure that policing, which is an essential underpinning of all our democratic principles, can happen at its very best? And to rather than complain about and to vilify the police when they get it wrong, to actually look systemically at what it is that can be done to help them achieve their mandates and goals.
Okay. I have a couple of emails, but also I'll go to the lines on 0891104208. Lots of SMSs. I'll read those in a minute.
The Forum at 8 with Xolani Gwala.
Some SMSs here. Mr. Cele's tactics of shoot to kill influence our police to be brutal. See what happened to Mr. Tatane, Big Boy Mashile in the Northern Cape, sent that SMS. Norman says, what must we do when we are forced to drink unsafe water at Diepsloot? Another one says, in most places in South Africa, the police are outperformed by the far smaller but better organized and more motivated private security industry. The ANC regime is a reincarnation of Verwoerd. They are fulfilling the obligations of National Party and Luele Khranje. It is because blacks have no capacity to vote, says this SMS. My nephew is a police officer. Their conditions of employment and the way they are treated is horrifying. No wonder they always break and do wrong things. That's an SMS from Durban. Another one says, to hide all, the SAPS should be held accountable by the CPFs, but even they are failing dismally. That's Martin Green, PE. Hello, Hassan, says this SMS. Another one from Korea says, these days police are not to be trusted. Look at how the Maberete behave. They are out of order. Another one from Mutusinko in Centurion. Government should provide citizens with electricity, sanitation, etc., so that citizens do not go on strikes. Let me hear quickly from Anne in Mpumalanga. Good morning, Anne. Hello.
And thank you for the wonderful topics that you bring through. Could you give me a little bit of time? Number one, a mob situation, as we all know, usually degenerates into violence against the relative targets. And I think our government and our political organizations shouldn't be giving the lead in fixing up everything with the mob situation, such as a march. which has been happening, so frequently here in South Africa. The second point I would like to make is the people who are in these marches today are generally the children of the people who were in the guerrilla warfare that actually won our freedom. We cannot say that our freedom was won by peaceful negotiations. All we have to do is read about the riots and the destruction of people, especially young people, in the Vaal Triangle, which we can read about in the burning of churches. There, young people were killed, were victimized, and what have you. And it's only through that our freedom eventually became a place. It was not a miracle. So what I'm saying is that today, we're only 20 years from that. We still have the blood of the people who were in these warfares still existing in our children, and rightly so in a way. And so we cannot blame all just on it is part of our society of today still.
Right.
And it'll take a while for young people to get it out of their blood.
All right, let me read some emails just to wrap up, and then I'll get closing comments from my guests. Denza says, this isn't just about improper training. I think the state must develop structures aimed at motivating police officers. If your mindset isn't in a good state, surely there would be a problem. Denza on email. Another email came through from, I'll tell you now, from Farouk, who says, police have a chip on their shoulder, period. That's Farouk in Durban. Another email came through, Kulego Guna, who says, I never came across such a corrupt sector in South Africa. As for me, I don't know what a police is, because these people practice all kinds of corruption, from criminals to nepotism. They should be encouraged to go training, including education, because some don't know their job description as police. That's Mkhuleko Guna at the University of the Free State. An email as well from Sig in Randburg. In the good old days when I was a crime reporter, Sig was a crime reporter, everybody, police weren't corrupt because honest police officers were frequently transferred from one part of the country to another. Those transfers prevented policemen from creating or participating in municipal or even provincial crime syndicates and political mafias of the kind that killed Andries Tatane under the auspices of ANC deployment. Sig in Randburg. Another email. We cannot be compared with the European countries in terms of protests. Our societies believe in stone throwing, and not negotiations. So when the speaker says police should talk to protesters, I tend to differ with him. In the East Rand, service delivery protesters start burning the municipality buildings at 2 a.m. This is no time to negotiate. There is no time to negotiate. At Vaal Rand, they close the freeway at 3 a.m. Would you talk to those people? There are negotiations, of course, when there are lawful and planned marches, it should be, and batons are not good enough for our societies. Rubber does the job. The criminals are actually taking chances in protests and do their activities. That's why there are no peaceful marches anymore. That's an email from Karel. It came through a short while ago. Let me just get to closing remarks then. I'll start again with Hassan.
Yeah, if we have about 2 or 3 service delivery protests per week, we clearly have a problem greater than what is happening in Europe, although the expression is not the same way. The extreme social and economic crisis experienced by us has a violent expression, because that itself is violent, but sometimes goes out openly. The police have to be prepared for that and have to be guided by the good words and good efforts that we're putting in. I mean, the RDP, we said that the security forces must be answerable to the Constitution, must be non-partisan, etc., must be sensitive to human rights and answerable to communities. So that remains our goal. I may be skeptical of how far we've gone to achieving it, but it's the best we have.
Okay. Barbara?
Yeah, I think that really at the end of the day what we need to be doing is we need to be trying as South Africans to ask of one another, what happened to you, before we point a blaming finger and say, what did you do? And I think that that's true of both sides in the story. We need to look at what has happened to our police before we blame them for what they have done.
Captain?
I just wanted to add that, Barbara brought up some very good points early on in the discussion, which I fully agree that more research needs to be done in terms of the violent nature of some communities and the mindset. But in terms of South African Police Service, we obviously will pursue to be as professional as we can, and obviously review our training policies as the need arises and look at best practices. But we are there for the community, and our members come from communities. So we want to obviously provide the best possible service to our communities.
Captain Dennis Adriao, spokesperson for the SAPS. Thank you for your time. Also, thank you, Barbara Holtman, independent facilitator, community safety processes, as well as Hassan Logat, social commentator. I thank the team as well, our producers, Misho Shandlale, Wisana Makubele and Bongi Mukhale, technical producer, Mark Prela and Umulemo Maja, senior producers, Lungile Mabaso and Chili Ditibase, Forum 8 producer, Jake Mukoma, chief producer, Budzilukoto, executive producers, Oprah Sechie and Busi Chane. I'm Xolani Gwala back again for you on Monday here on SAFM. Monday here on SAFM. Monday here on SAFM. Monday here on SAFM. Monday here on SAFM.